Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this Friday to join us for what is going to be our third year on stage, talking about trends in the entertainment industry. I'm Jonas from Luminate. We are today going to talk about 10 trends which have been impacting probably almost everybody in the room over the last 12 months. And it's been a very interesting year for all of us. We've seen, obviously, the continued rise of streaming. We've seen a proliferation of content across music, film, and TV at an unprecedented level. We've seen strikes affect Hollywood, and we've seen industry discourse around topics such as the impact of AI and the impact of economics on artist payouts and royalties and many other topics. At Luminate, we're looking at these trends every single day, week, month, and hopefully you'll find what we're going to talk about today interesting. So let's jump in. And we're going to start looking at streaming dynamics, which is always a very popular topic for our audience. So first of all, global on-demand audio streams increased in 2023 by 22%. And we hit the 4 trillion mark for the first time in 2023, which is a major milestone. Zooming out a little bit, if we were to look at the 2021 number of global streams, which is about 2.7 trillion, we've had a 50% increase in just 2 years. This is remarkable growth and shows just the continued adoption of streaming in emerging markets, as well as other effects coming from increased smartphone adoption through apps and other ways of accessing this content. In the US, the total industry on-demand audio streaming grew just under 13%. And this is also the second year in a row where the total industry audio streaming number has accelerated. The streaming trend is just not slowing down. Digging into the drivers a little more, as we revealed in our 2023 year-end report, certain genres were very, very important in driving this growth, certainly in the US on-demand audio. And the 3 most important were world, which includes K-pop and Afrobeats, where we saw about a 26% increase in growth. Latin, of course, which has been very popular and we've talked about a lot, increasing 24%. And country as well, growing by the same amount. Now, we'll talk a bit more about Latin in a moment. Part of the growth in Latin is really due to the rise in subgenres, specifically regional Mexican music, which saw a 60% increase in US streaming in 2023 alone. US regional Mexican listenership sees higher concentrations on the West Coast and through Southwest in states like Texas. And this listenership actually aligns very well with census demographic trends we've looked at, which shows Hispanic population patterns in the US. And we've talked about this before in other forums, but about 47% of Latin music fans are discovering music via friends and relatives, and the tie to culture and geography and location is very evident when we look at this growth. Country's continued rise is a very different set of dynamics, and it's really due to younger listeners of the genre adapting to streaming. Gen Z country listeners in the US are 48% more likely to discover new music through video or audio streaming services than the average US music listener, and 16% more likely than Gen Z music listeners. And Gen Z country listeners in the US are 64% more likely to listen to playlists shared by family and friends than the average US music listeners, and 16% more likely than Gen Z music listeners. We look at Latin specifically, again, another incredible year in 2023. 6 Latin artists alone achieved more than 1 billion on-demand audio streams in the US. And you can see some of the names up there, such as Bad Bunny and Peso Pluma, who played here just this week. And each of these artists were in the US top 125 of all artists for 2023 audio streaming. As we'll see a little bit later on, driving this streaming share of English language content amongst the top 10,000 streaming tracks in the US is the fact that more and more non-Spanish speakers are listening to Latin music. And as you'll see in a moment, the actual percentage of English language listenership decreased in 2023 as a result of this trend. This year, we're going to talk a little bit more about TV and film than we have in previous years. We're going to try and draw some comparisons and contrasts to what we're seeing in the music industry. Looking at film and TV streaming, we're using a new set of products and tools that we built, which is using our streaming viewership model. And here we're showing on screen the top 10 programs that providers such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, Paramount, and others achieved in 2023 and 2022 based on their number of appearances in a top 10 chart. Now, it's pretty clear Netflix is still the market leader in terms of the most popular programming. What our analysis shows is there's increased competition for this. that other networks have started to get more of their programs into the weekly top 10, with Amazon Prime and Paramount specifically being the main beneficiaries. It's also important just to remind everybody here, there's a lot of content on the slides. We do make this presentation available at the end of the session. The team back at Luminate love it when you take pictures and post, but if you don't have time, we'll make it available for you later. So with global content and consumption driving streaming trends, let's take a look in a bit more detail at some of the global trends. Several trends have emerged as the industry goes more global. We can see that the share of English language content in the top 10,000 global tracks continues to decline from 67% to 55% from 2021 to 2022. The share of US streamed English language content among the top 10,000 streaming tracks in the US has decreased by just under 4% since 2021, with Spanish language content taking that exact same share over the same time frame. And while English language content is still the most dominant language music listened to in the US market, Spanish language music is definitely closing in on that 10% number. Looking at the film and TV side, we can see that foreign language content is growing in the US on streaming video on demand platforms. For example, content depicting stories from Asia was up over 100% last year in terms of production. And streaming video on demand of foreign language films also increased by just over 22%. Moving on to our third trend, which is around audience discovery. And this really focuses on the fact that content discovery is a topic that continued to generate attention in 2023, not least because of the continued expansion of music content creation, resulting in discovery challenges for artists and consumers alike. Looking at multi-language consumers, these are listeners who listen to music in multiple languages. They don't necessarily speak multiple languages, but they're listening to music in these different languages to the ones they're most familiar with. Our audience research shows that these listeners are 34% more likely to discover music through movies and soundtracks, 36% more likely through exclusive TV shows from streaming platforms, and 50% more likely through video games than the average music listener. That visual element is really key for the users in the US. These multilingual music listeners are also more likely than the US general population to use very community-focused social media platforms such as Discord, Reddit, and other platforms where they can really dive in and explore their fandom and network. I also want to specifically call out WhatsApp here, which we talked about before. WhatsApp has traditionally been a tool for communication across borders, across long distances, and it makes a lot of sense that it would be these multilingual listeners who are twice as likely to use WhatsApp and to discover content through this very mechanism. We look at soundtracks, it's very interesting to see the trend of soundtracks creating new discovery opportunities across different markets. Here we're looking specifically at the Spider-Verse soundtrack, which was the Metro Boomin-produced soundtrack for the film that came out last summer. Looking at box office performance, we see the US in the lead, followed by Mexico and the United Kingdom. These are areas where both the soundtrack performed highest in the world in connection with its box office opening. And this also continues what we referenced in the previous slide, the visual element being key to music discovery. Soundtracks are basically really being incredibly powerful in getting music into new markets and new territories and helping fans interact with content they may not have discovered before. Of course, we can't talk about discovery without talking about short-form video. Gen Z music streamers are 50% more likely than the average US streamer to discover new music via short-form video platforms. And Gen Z music streamers are 40% more likely than the average US streamer to broadcast their music as well. So not only are they finding music on these platforms, but they are ones championing these artists and sharing their music. When looking at the top short-form video platforms among Gen Z music streamers, we see that 64% of them use TikTok, 50% of them use Snapchat, and 43% of them use Instagram Reels. When you look at Gen Alpha, the story changes again. 72% of music streamers use TikTok, and 46%, nearly 1 in 2, use YouTube Shorts, with the remainder using Snapchat. And as a reminder, Gen Alpha is just turning 16 this year. So whatever we're seeing in terms of short-form video trends today are likely to change over the next 3 to 5 years. Moving to film and TV streaming platforms, the ecosystem is much more fragmented. Using the Pokemon content library as an example, these titles are now spread across 5 different streaming video on demand platforms in the US. And that's not even going to get you the full series because you still need to purchase Season 2 and Season 13 directly due to the lack of availability on any streaming platform. This really illustrates just how confusing it can be for a fan and how fragmented it can get when you have all these different content offerings across different platforms. And this does really affect the ability to search and the ability to discover new content, whether music or film and TV. Superfans is a topic which I probably heard discussed almost more than any other this week. And at Luminate, we've been talking about superfans really for the last 3 years, and this year is really no different. Especially because a superfan is really considered one of the next wave of growths for the music industry. So let's take a look at what happened in 2023. Our research finds that 18% of US music listeners are considered superfans. And when we define a superfan, what does it really mean? It means a fan who has said they engage with artists or their music in 5 or more different ways. So for example, they stream music, they buy physical, they buy merchandise, they discover music through movies, TV soundtracks, and they engage with artists online, for example. They qualify as a superfan. These are the fans which the music industry is working out how they can nurture and find more value for. Now, a couple of numbers are really important. I want to call that to spend a lot more money. Superfans spend 68% more money on music each month than the average US music listener. And they also spend 126% more on merchandise. Superfans, unsurprisingly, also spend 88% more money on physical music compared to the average US music listener. And one place they spend this is at independent retailers. And on the slide here, you can see that dance, R&B, hip-hop, and rock are the genres that over-index at independent retail compared to the rest of the US physical music industry. Superfans and D2C or direct-to-consumer are also a really, really important element. In D2C or direct-to-consumer, we're referring to artist and label e-commerce sites. So a sale that's happening directly on either the artist's store or the label store. D2C reached 12.7 million total physical sales last year in the US. And physical D2C sales were up to almost 30% compared to 2022. And something interesting to note, and we'll look at this trend a little bit later on as well, is that 60% of all direct-to-consumer sold titles were current. There's a continued conversation about current versus catalog, with catalog share growing in streaming, but direct-to-consumer bucks that trend, with superfans sometimes looking to purchase multiple copies of their favorite artist's new release. So let's take a look at the catalog versus current trends. Again, something we've looked at for the last couple of years. One of the important things to frame when we're talking about current versus catalog is that even though Kate Bush was an incredible breakout story from 2022, it ended up being a top 25 on-demand audio track that year. It's more an exception than the rule. And actually, as you'll see in a moment from these set of slides, 48% of on-demand audio streaming last year came from music released between 2019 and 2023, so just in the last 5 years. And here's a couple of catalog tracks that ranked as the most listened to in 2023 based on their respective release year. So here we're looking at 1995. The biggest song in 1995 was California Love by Tupac. And you can see in the top right of this slide that in 2023, he generated close to 134 million streams, and was actually number 496 as a song and artist in 2023 based on that track that was released in 1995. If we look at 1987, Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, you can see the same numbers, number 242, 170 million plus streams in 2023. And if you go back as far as 1977, it's Fleetwood Mac Dreams, which came in at number 56 for 2023 with over 280 million streams. And Dreams is really an exception. It's in the class of Kate Bush. It has an enduring impact, and certainly TikTok and discovery on the TikTok platform really drove its persistent listening in 2023, as you can see in the numbers here. Looking at current versus catalog in a little bit more detail, we can look at trends across different genres. Here, for the first time, we've broken out sub-catalog into 2 categories. We're looking at catalog, what we call deep catalog, and deep catalog is referring to music that's been released 36 months or longer. Probably no surprise to people in the room that pop and rock had the highest deep catalog streams in 2023, as the popularity of these genres, specifically in the US, dates way back further. You'll also notice that R&B and hip-hop has the highest share of songs streamed within the 18 to 36-month age, reflecting the more recent dominance of that genre. And of course, world music, where we find K-pop, specifically has the highest share of streams from tracks 36 months or newer compared to total overall streaming, much of that driven by K-pop and Afrobeats and other growth within this category in the US in recent years. Going over to film and TV, we see there's actually been almost a 21% decline in the amount of film and TV premieres that came out in the US, partly driven by strikes in 2023, but also as production investment decreases from a peak in prior years. So whether looking at music or film and TV, with so much content for viewers and listeners to keep up with across the many different platforms, we're going to want to keep an eye on this as we move forward and continue to look at the trend of current versus catalog and that conversation. Moving on to a very exciting trend in 2023. If it seemed like Miley Cyrus, SZA, or Taylor Swift were essentially glued to the top of the charts last year, that was not just due to their notable success in releasing hit music, but also part of a much larger trend. Consumption of music from female-identifying artists was up just over 4 percentage share points compared to 2022 in terms of volume streaming through the top 500 artists. But it wasn't just last year, and I want to illustrate a couple of things on this slide. The most important being that this is a trend that dates back to at least 2019. Aside from a small dip in 2022, the overall streaming share of female-identifying artists within the top 500 has consistently been going up. In 2019, it was just shy of 25%, and most recently in 2023, it broke through the 30% mark. Now, of course, we can't mention the success of female artists in 2023 without highlighting Taylor Swift. A couple of stats we mentioned at the back end of last year, which certainly got a lot of press coverage, is Taylor Swift made up just under 1.8% of the total US album market in 2023, which is a phenomenal number. And while there are 1.2 trillion streams in the US market alone, 1 in 76 were as a result of Taylor Swift last year. And then, of course, not surprisingly, the Eras Tour and her TV and film production broke records and contributed to the success. And similarly with Beyoncé. Her concert film released in December grossed $42 million in its first month. And as we all know, she's been breaking barriers as a country music crossover. Her new song, Texas Hold'em, hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 just last month, and it still tops the Hot Country Songs chart. And how can we not talk about Barbie? Barbie, of course, the female-directed, written and produced film, the highest-grossing film of 2023, almost $1.5 billion, and also the highest-grossing Warner Brothers release of all time. The highest-grossing movie directed solely by a woman, and the soundtrack produced 11 Grammy nominations and 3 wins, including Song of the Year. It was a huge film and TV crossover moment that culminated last weekend, of course, at the Oscars. Moving on to live, it's been impossible to ignore the live industry's spectacular resurgence post-COVID, so let's take a look at 2023. Live music events make up 62% of monthly music spend amongst US music listeners. And in 2023, we saw that overall listeners of all generations report spending more on music concerts in 2023 than they did in 2022. Millennials spend the most on live music, spending 34% more per month than the average music listener, and more than every other demographic. Our latest research also shows that live music events impact music consumption on streaming platforms at the local level. And when we analyzed this data, we looked at 50 artists, close to 1,000 shows in 129 US markets. The median event yield at a local level during the week was a 42% increase in growth in on-demand streaming versus the previous week. So what that basically means is when an artist plays locally, the impact on their streaming is local to that region and very significant, or can be very significant. This also varies by genre. For electronic dance music, the median percentage increase was more like 143%. Country and hip-hop at 20%, rock at 63%, Latin at 35%, and pop at 53%. But overall, everything increases. So what we see is these events drive consumption at a local level, which then returns royalties back into the music ecosystem. Users spend more money on a ticket. They go through the act of going to the show, and it creates royalties downstream. Now, we also looked at how streams and ticket sales correlate. What you're looking here is an anonymized case study of a high-profile co-headlining rock tour last year. We're looking at tickets reported through Billboard's box score against streaming consumption in the local market. As you can see, there's a positive correlation between the volume of on-demand audio streams in the market and the number of tickets sold. You can also see with the small yellow mark on the chart, we've also called out in a specific example an area where we think more tickets could have been sold based on how popular that artist is in a particular region. So streaming data actually helps identify how many tickets can be sold in the market. It's becoming a really important signal to understand how to identify, book, and tour with talent, especially as streaming continues its dominant role in the music ecosystem. Over the last few days in Austin, I've heard the word metadata almost as much as AI, and this seems to remain a pervasive problem in the music industry. Our view is it's probably not getting better, probably getting worse, and with more and more content being created, in turn generated by the proliferation of AI and other generative tools, we've got a problem growing. One of the challenges facing the industry right now that we see is the difficulty in identifying proper rights holders. One way our team think about this is that everybody has the right to be called Drake, and everybody has the right to create a song called One Dance. Now, as a result, many, many people do. You can see on the screen here in the slide on the background, these are all the different search variations you can possibly get within recording artists today using the word Drake in their name. You obviously have Drake, the Canadian rapper. You also have the Chilean heavy metal rock band. You could also probably bring up Julius Drake, the English pianist. You could also bring up Bob Drake. You could bring up Christopher Drake or Nick Drake or Alfred Drake. There's many Drakes out there. The chart on the right also shows the most popular words in an artist's name globally. Yes, Juju and Supernova are number one. There's no real restrictions on artists having the same name. So one of our challenges is how we're going to make sense of this when it comes to royalty payments. Continue with the Drake example here. Just the international variations alone can create metadata challenges. Then you have composer, title, and other key identifiers. And this can make it harder to identify the correct rights holders. Now, I started this section off by saying the challenges with royalty income tracking, but this relates to PROs, labels, managers, and artists, and just the web of different variations that can happen in the global music industry today. Finally, metadata is reliant on a distributed and connected system of identifiers where further challenges exist. For those of you familiar with the ISRC, 97% of recorded music is matched to an ISRC, but when you look at the publishing side or the ISWC, there's only 21% coverage, and the IPI is even less. Last year, the MLC reported in their 2023 annual report that over $100 million were not distributed because of unmatched royalties. This is definitely a place of challenge in the music industry, especially as now we are seeing more and more news articles calling out how various actors are starting to manipulate the system for their own uses. And as the music industry continues to confront new opportunities and challenges brought on by AI, there will be likely increased issues in matching metadata to the pace of content creation by the technology. And this is why a topic should be a top concern and something we'll spend more time talking about this year. Another key topic discussed this week in various sessions is mindfulness in music or functional music. And 2023 was a year of much debate and change around this as well. There's been a lot of conversation about sleep sounds, ocean noise, rain music, or washing machine noises to put your baby to sleep. At Luminate, we call this NEARS, nature, noise, effects, ambient, relations, and sounds. And we've analyzed tracks within our database in a very thin slice of everything we see, as you can see on the slide here, in the 100 to 120,000 range and the 500 to 520,000 range in terms of most popular tracks. When we look at this music, we estimate that the amount of content that we see is in the 3 to 4% range of all recorded music, or all music existing on streaming platforms today. And as you've probably seen and heard this week, some of the DSPs, such as Deezer and others, or certainly Deezer, are taking very deliberate steps to work out how this music exists within their platforms going forward, and a topic we think is important and one we'll continue to monitor. Okay, we've made it to our last trend. Thank you for bearing with me. And one we've covered every single year, and this year is no different. Last year on this stage, we talked about the record speed at which new ISRCs or tracks are being uploaded daily to streaming platforms. And unsurprisingly, this continued to grow during 2023 with an increase of 11% over 2022, an average of just over 103,000 new tracks uploaded to DSPs every day in 2023. And then consistent with 2022, 96% of these tracks are non-major distributed or independent. Last year, we also shared our inaugural global track streaming pyramid, and now we have an updated 2023 version. In 2023, we tracked 184 million audio ISRCs at Luminate. 436,000 of these were streamed 1 million or more times globally, and that's a 17% increase compared to the 373,000 tracks that were streamed 1 million times in 2022. But on the flip side, as we often discuss, not all tracks have the same streaming impact. And last year, we believe there were just over 45 million tracks globally that had 0 streams. And there were just under 80 million that had 10 or fewer streams. And if you look at 100 or fewer streams, then you're looking at total just shy of 125 million of the 184 million tracks having 100 or fewer streams. So the trend that we shared last year has continued, and in some ways has even gotten more extreme. Just the amount and volume of content that's been hitting the ecosystem. As a reminder, that number averaged 103,000 US IRCs uploaded to streaming platforms every single day in 2023. Looking at the global level, we tracked just under 13 million artists by the end of 2023. The top 100 artists made up 13% of all audio streams, and the top 10,000 artists made up 66%. So 2 out of 3 streams globally came from artists in the top 10,000 of 13 million artists globally. The implications here are that the barriers for all creators to get tracks on DSPs are virtually none, but that the majority of streaming still comes from artists at the very top of our pyramid. And then last slide, finally, let's look at the data broken out by distribution model. And this is looking at the most streamed track for any artist. What we found when we looked at this was that the share of those artists who have a major label listed on their top-performing ISRC last year dominates on-demand audio. But at lower volume tracks, you can see how independent share starts to grow to where almost 26% of artists who achieved between 10 and 50 million audio streams last year had an independent distributor attached to their most streamed track. And the yellow shading you see on screen is where there was no major or no independent label listed on their most streamed track. 48%, nearly 1 in 2 artists with a yearly streaming count between 1 and 10 million on-demand audio streams last year did not have a major or known independent on their most streamed track. And as you can see, this is pointing to the creator community and the people who are able to also use independent distribution to get their tracks onto these streaming platforms. This brings this year's session to an end, so thank you again for joining. 2023 was definitely another year of growth and change in the music and entertainment ecosystem. I hope to see you all again next year for a review of 2024. Thanks for spending your time with us. We are not going to take questions on stage, but myself and my team will be around directly after this if you'd like to follow up with any questions. And as I mentioned, all this material will be able to download from our website very shortly. Thank you for joining.